She's keen that people look beyond the statistics and the graphs and digest the real-world impact of this form of work and the ethical implications upon people. Thank you, Marjorie.
Thanks. I'll stand up as well.
Yeah.
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for having me here. It's great to come back to the Northeast. And if you don't understand my accent, I had a few pints yesterday. Just let me know. Right, so thank you. I didn't really know much about the Northeast when I arrived here. I just watched a couple of movies like Billy Elliot and The Pullman Tea. And I know there were a lot of strikes a few decades ago. But I was really keen to find out what happened here and to get to know this region better and this country better. I made friends for life here and I had a great time. And once again, I'm really glad to be back. So through voluntary work in Sunderland, working with homeless teenagers, I more or less got in touch with people from the TUC. I met Neil Foster, who asked me to do some research on something called zero-hour contracts. I didn't really know what they were, but actually I realized that I've been myself working under zero-hour contracts throughout my studies all the time. I also lived in the Midlands before studying in Durham, and when I first came back to France, I told myself the British labour is quite harsh, it's quite merciless, and this is only when I started this research comparing with my country that I really noticed, and this confirmed to me that something was wrong, and that many people here were actually really suffering. So I think zero-hour contracts clearly led to completely unbalanced relationship. They give far too much power to employers and very little to workers. And they also clearly make totally subjective components intervene, emotional blackmailing sometimes, and something that have nothing to do in the workplace. So I really believe that this confines people in spiral, precarious life, invisibility, and of course, therefore, inaction. So this has to change, this has to be addressed. And also I would like to say that this doesn't happen in just big businesses, but in small pubs, in all kinds and types of businesses. So I'm going to try to give you an insight of what are the practical implications of zero-hour contracts on daily lives. I will mention the first names of the people just for intimacy reasons. Of course, the businesses and the last names won't be mentioned. So in Seaham, I met Bill, who was 56 years old, had 2 kids, and was working at the time for a Scottish freight company. And when you ask him about the main issues, say that for him, the first issue is clearly the impossibility to refuse hours, and the implicit sanctions that come with it, of course, if you do. So as I said, there was unexpected emotional blackmailing intervening. Like, he told me, if they like you, you get hours, and far too many hours. If they don't like you, they put you at the bottom of the list, and they forget about you for a while. So, this is clearly emotional threatening here. Bill stayed over 6 years working for this company, but there was such a bad atmosphere between colleagues, there was jealousy intervening, that this is partly why he left. And there's also a clear feeling of unrest. He told me this is mentally exhausting, of course, it can call you at any time. And divorce was clearly mentioned. He told me I clearly considered having a divorce with my life at several points. And this is something quite repetitive, divorce in this case. For myself, I was working in a small pub in Durham as a student, and I had a completely chaotic schedule. I often had to leave lectures because I was getting a text, and by fear of losing my job, I would just leave the lecture. And my name on the schedule, on the rota, was always followed by a question mark. And I never really knew if I was, expected to come to work or not. And until the very last minute. One day I called before 30 minutes coming to work, asked my boss, so am I expected tonight? She was like, no. I told her, I think this is quite unfair. And then she told my colleague, Marjorie had a bit of an attitude. And I got sacked by text a few days later. So I should have gone to my lectures. So I think zero-hour contracts are actually used sometimes by employers to pressure workers. And also they create a big rivalry between people who are actually under permanent contracts. Like in this pub, my manager was under permanent contract, but he was constantly reminded how lucky he was and how so many people were actually, would be happy to replace him. And for that he got impossible hours, and he had, for example, I think he had a 4-year-old kid at the time. It was impossible, sometimes she was sick, impossible to leave the workplace. And yeah, my boss was constantly reminding him, many people will be happy to take your place. So I think there's also a problem nowadays, is that there's a sort of imperative for positive thinking, because jobs have become so rare, people have to be thankful for any job they get, whatever the conditions are, and this has to stop. And there's a stigmatization of people as well. If they don't refuse these conditions, they're just lazy people who are not willing and don't deserve to work. Then I met Janice from Seaham as well, 53 years old, who was working in a private sector industry. And she told me that there's also, for her, the biggest problem was the great inequality between like workers. For instance, despite her age, she always got night shifts and weekends, always, over 5 years. And if she would complain, she would get less hours. So she told me I'm never able to make like weekend, family, birthday parties, that's impossible. So just on the long term, how do you keep integrating to your family when you don't attend all the most important events? Of course you're talking about divorce after a while. One time too, I was working in a big nightclub in Birmingham, my first year in the UK. And one night there were very few customers. And one of my mate colleagues arrived. He had been driving from Coventry, which was about 40 minutes drive, so petrol spending. He was away, as soon as he arrived, he was sent home straight away. I mean, you know, how come being employed today in the 21st developed economy, and how come coming to work is no longer guaranteed that you actually get some work? This is crazy. Then I met Neil, 43 years old. Not you.
Not me. Not a 0 hours
Everybody looks at Neil.
I want to make this clear. He's not a tyrant, bullying player.
So yeah, he was also working with this Chinese woman, and he told me his working hours were actually fluctuating between 19 and 82 hours a week. How do you cope with that? So he's of course completely incapable of planning his life. One time he's trying to take some holiday, like he took some holidays, but when you don't get called the day before, then you don't need that holiday anymore and still have to take it anyway. And he told me so several times in the year, alimentary basic spending have to be cut, yeah? And we're not even talking about leisure here, just basic needs, like food. His wife was also working under the same condition, and once again, they admitted that their life couple and the family couple has been several times under really serious stress. I would also like to mention the problems of training and the low investment that's made on those people. So Neil's wife, for instance, not your wife once again, she got 50 hours of training that remain unpaid so far. And this was apparently included in the contract. And myself, I worked in a coffee shop as a barista, and my team and I, we were all asked to watch YouTube videos at home on how to make a proper cappuccino. So when it's quite hard to feel valued at work when so little investment is made on you. And if you don't feel valued in the place where you spend most of your time, where do you get your pride and your identity from? So I think what I noticed, what came out of this study, is that really in this region, and I think in the whole country, there's a lack and there's a desperate need for dialogue. People between themselves don't even talk about it. And that might be my French side always complaining, but when I came back to France, I was like, people don't even question this, you know, because they think that this is the norm and this is what's available for them, and that's it, they don't even question that. So, yeah, here's the lesson. I think 0-hour contracts have some intangible aspect. Like for me, it allowed me as a student to get an extra income. That wasn't regular, but still I got a few skills and it allowed me to maybe enter the labor market. That's also another story. But I met Anthony also in his 30s at the time. He told me he had a positive experience in combination with another job. But now he's 40 and he got a permanent job, and clearly, you know, with a kid, he's well happy to have that. So good practice is possible, but unfortunately, it's too heavily reliant, you know, on management ethics. The lack of framework is the explanation. So here's the first point to finish. I think we have reached in the UK an unprecedented level of impunity from managers, and I think it is not exaggerated to say that 0-hour contracts have become an instrument to pick up people randomly and make them then interchangeable, throw them, you know, when they're not used anymore, and when they're not able to meet irrational needs. And I think also people keep this to themselves. They swallow their anxiety and their resentment, and they believe that's what's best for them, that's what's available. So negativity enters all aspects of life, and this is beneficial for nobody. So I think my third point would be that we need to find effective forms of communication to get people to talk about it. Just talk about it, you know, share the humiliation, because we're clearly talking about humiliation here. And letting anger and anxiety enter the society has never proved to be good. So this is, I think, my conclusion. You know, since a very young age, I've always been willing to come to the UK because I thought it was a very dynamic country, full of originality. I traveled a lot, and I had the opportunity to live in many places, and this is one of the warmest and the friendliest region I've lived in. So I hope, you know, these voices will be heard. Thank you very much.
Questions, comments? Yeah, please.
Thank you. Keith Brooks. I'm a GNB member and an independent employee relations consultant. Interesting paper, Marjorie. I understand why you can't name the employers because of the research, but it's a question to you, but it's also possibly linked to that previous one. I mean, why isn't there a name and shame list? I mean, I've really amazed this last few months, various bits of work I've done and conferences I've been to, as the companies that are doing zero-hours contracts. I mean, the massive blue chip, global, international, bespoke companies that are actually